Welcome to our panel on governance of AI, and we're going to focus on how to approach governance to match the speed at which AI is progressing through your organizations, but we're also going to bring a dose of responsibility and ethics into the conversation as well. How's the volume? Can you hear okay? A little loud back there? We're good. Cool. There's my friend John. Hi, John. Excellent. My name is Jeff Saviano. I'm with EY. I lead emerging technology, strategy, and governance at EY, and also have some university appointments. I lead a team at Harvard studying AI ethics, so we're going to be talking a bit about ethics today, and also have an appointment here at MIT, and I teach an advanced innovation and technology class at Boston University School of Law, and really excited about this panel, and excited to introduce our esteemed panelists. If I could, why don't we go down the line and please introduce yourself. Sasha,
Yep.
You want to start?
Hi, I'm Sasha. I'm a researcher and the climate lead at Hugging Face, which is a global startup that does responsible machine learning. We have a platform where people share models and data sets, and we try to promote the responsible usage of AI artifacts. And I'm on the board of Women in Machine Learning because we have a big gender discrepancy issue in AI, around 12 to 15% women in our field. So Women in Machine Learning tries to organize events, do mentorship, and help balance out a little bit. And I'm one of the founding members of Climate Change AI, which is an organization that tries to bring together communities from climate science, from sustainability, ecology, with people from machine learning and AI to help, once again, create synergies and tackle some pressing issues.
You're very busy.
Not as busy as you. I think you had 4 appointments, I counted.
Please.
Hey everyone, my name is Gill. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Virtru. I'm excited to be back on campus because I'm an MIT alum, and I like to say that I drank the Kool-Aid after MIT. I got into startups and tech. And today focusing on helping organizations track their global supply chains for human rights risks, for climate impacts using AI. It's really exciting to be on this panel to talk about governance and AI. I'll talk a little bit about regulations and how AI is really an enabler for responsible business.
Excellent. Always nice to come home, isn't it?
Really nice to come home.
Love it. Excellent. Brad.
Hi, everyone. Siraj. I also love the fact that I'm coming back to MIT. Before joining MassMutual, I was part of the MIT's endowment, responsible for the buildings that you saw in Kendall Square, or blame us, or them, I should say. I also started my career with a relationship to MIT at Arthur D. Little, which established the whole management consulting industry and their headquarters somewhere close by. My name is Rod. For those of you who speak Arabic and Farsi, it means thunder. You could guess about my 2 younger brothers, what their names are. I live in Brookline, across the river here. I did my undergraduate computer science at UC Santa Barbara, focusing on cryptography. Did my master's at Harvard, focusing on AI. That's where I witnessed the seminal paper on learnability theory by Leslie Valiant. Since then, I played CIO, CTO roles with established companies like Eaton Vance and startups like Endeca. I'm now the head of AI governance at MassMutual, a life insurance company established in 1851. And governance of AI technology is so important, and we could talk more about that.
You had me at thunder. Excellent. Every panel needs a little bit of thunder, Rod. Love it. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you. We want to start with, I want to introduce a framework that we've been working on. I lead a research team at Harvard that's been studying applied AI ethics, and it's an ethics approach to governance. The reason we started this work is that, frankly, we felt that there was a gap in the world, that there were many governance frameworks which typically were adopting principles. Everybody's adopting, whether it's NIST or OECD principles, and then they were stopping. And so we devised this framework, and working from bottom to top, the bottom 2 layers represent the legal mandate that organizations have. And that's the reason we started there is because we heard from boards and we heard from members of the C-suite that the first order of business they wanted was to comply with the law. So the bottom layer are the non-AI specific laws that would still affect AI systems. Think GDPR, think from a board oversight standpoint, think Caremark and the progeny of cases with Caremark. Of course, AI laws and the regulations that are coming with the EU AI Act as an example. Moving up into what we refer to as conscious capitalism. And what we found in our research is that there are many applied ethical actions that are not only good for the world, but actually will promote the business too. They will help preserve reputation and preserve brands, and also they're good for society. So we collected different examples at each layer. And then lastly, this highest level we call ethical elevation. And we included that because there were so many boards and so many C-suites that were asking for something more, saying that they wanted to go further. What were some things that they could do that may not necessarily produce an ROI, but would produce a return for the world? So that was encouraging to me. The last thing I'll say, when we presented this to an ethicist at Harvard, looked at it and said, okay, I get it. I see how this can be helpful, but you're missing something. And you're missing this fundamental human rights layer. We love to refer to this as the Hippocratic Oath of AI. First, do no harm in the world. And so let's think about that as we roll into our first question. But we wanted to flash this because we think that there is a gap in the world for an applied ethics approach to governance. And so we hope that this can help fill some of that gap. Okay, all right, let's get started. Rod, you're gonna kick us off, and we're gonna start with the softball question of what's going right with governance. And if you want to also include some aspects of it that you think in this frenzy that we're in with AI use cases and development, if there are some things that are a little bit off in governance, that's okay too. But why don't you start us off, Rod?
Great, happy to do that. So someone said at this conference that governance is about preventing risks, which is great, but not really exciting, at least for me. I'm thinking that governance has a branding challenge. I'd love for all of us to change that. I'm going to use a metaphor that we use at MassMutual, which is that brakes in cars allow cars to go faster, not slower. Brakes in cars allow cars to go faster. Imagine if cars had no brakes. In some sense, a reassurance that the path is going to prevent many of the common risks will allow faster innovation. So I think that's one current state that I hope we could close. Second, you mentioned principle-based approaches. I think that's the right approach to do that, in contrast with a checklist approach. If you have a checklist approach, please stop it. It kills innovation. A principle-based approach is much more agile, really allows one to identify the new risks and decide which controls to be mitigated. And on a weekly basis, there are new risks that come with every advance in AI technology. The last one that I would propose is related to regulations. No matter what your domain is, life insurance is governed by, in the United States, by states, not at the federal level. So yes, we pay attention to the executive order on AI that President Biden signed a couple of months ago. We pay attention to what's happening on the EU side to learn from it, but we really pay attention to what's happening on the states side. Not every industry is like that. You need to pay attention to that to prepare your organization for the ultimate regulations. And existing, by the way, there's a misnomer about AI governance that it's non-existent or it's coming soon kind of thing. But the fact of the matter is that existing regulations really apply. Massachusetts last week basically said, we're not going to add a new AI regulation, whatever existing regulations applies. So you just need to be mindful of that. Those are the three things that I would add.
Combination of federal, at least in the US, federal in the States. There's actually a decent volume of regulation that's happening in the States. Same question, Jag, for you. What's working well with governance, and in your experiences, what do you think are some of the gaps that exist?
Yeah, so when I think about governance with kind of manufacturing organizations, companies that we work with, retailers and brands, it's so interesting because, in the not too distant past, organizations and their supply chains were just incredibly unsexy, right? And now, given COVID, given geopolitical risks, given kind of adverse countries that we do business with, supply chains are kind of front and center and a hotbed for risks, and therefore a tsunami of governance coming in all different directions, right? Sasha, you mentioned coming through Customs and Border Patrol, right, today. So interesting that Customs and Border Patrol is using AI to track goods coming globally into the United States and enforcing regulation around forced labor, responsible business, right? The North Star being dignified work for folks in the supply chain, in other countries, and goods coming into the country. And so, really exciting applications of kind of new technologies for governance, kind of for government regulations. For example, investors are also shining a light on governance for businesses and supply chains. There are companies that want to IPO and raise capital here in the United States and are prevented from doing so because of their practices, because of their lack of responsibility around climate and human rights. Increasingly, I think that consumers have a role in governance as well, right? Like the choices that we're making in terms of products that we consume.
Yeah, what do you mean?
Yeah, I think that consumers are increasingly looking for ethical practices from organizations and companies that they spend money on. We're seeing that increasingly with younger consumers, younger demographics. Right. There's corporate governance because companies are now looking at this new set of consumers and realizing that a mission and values around ethical practices is really important. And so AI is really important and seismic in my world when I work with companies. AI is becoming a driver for automation of supply chain mapping, right? Automation of supply chain visibility, resiliency. There are things that supply chain managers just can't do manually, right? Linking together disparate data, unstructured data. And to that point around kind of goods coming in from China, potentially made with forced labor, there are so many complexities with kind of global, multi-tiered, fragmented, complex supply chain. I mean, even the sneakers that I'm wearing today, right? Hugely complex products to make. And so we need new technologies and AI to shine a light on issues and risks that, frankly, we can't do. And so just to make that concrete, some of the work that we do is combining very disparate data, so non-obvious data, corporate ownership records from companies in the global south, news, events, alerts, Twitter, audit reports, synthesizing all that data using AI, and then being able to shine a light on potential risks and inferences of risks.
I want to come back to some of the supply chain issues, but first, Sasha, over to you. I'd love to hear from you a bit on the who. So if you look across organizations, and because of the pace at which AI is being adopted, not just in the private sector, but in the public sector as well, I'd love to hear your point of view about who are the actors within an organization who are leading it, and what are some of the best practices that you've seen?
What I've seen works is when governance is not siloed, when it's really a distributed approach, and actually distributed outside the company as well, because consumers and users also have levers. Maybe they're a little bit more subtle than companies' levers as well, but what I found, I've worked in a couple of companies now in AI, when, for example, there's connections between researchers like me with decision makers, with the people actually talking to the customers and figuring out how tools are used, then we can, for example, issues get flagged, and then there's a sort of communication that happens. Whereas if researchers are just training cool models, and researchers have this tendency to kind of like to tinker with stuff and not necessarily think about how it's going to work in real life. And so in that case, we don't get that feedback loop, and we just make things that aren't particularly useful in the long run. And also something I've seen a lot are rebound effects and feedback loops. In the way that, for example, AI is created and evaluated. So for example, we'll think about a specific metric like efficiency. Efficiency is a big thing in AI. People want the models to go burr, to go fast. And then, for example, the rebound effect can be increased usage because you can use a model, it'll go faster. So now you're going to use more of the model, and actually the overall compute cost or whatever metric you're tracking is going to go up. And so it's interesting because I think that the way to solve these rebound effects, these indirect impacts, is governance, is regulation. Because, for example, if you start anticipating these rebound effects, there's actually one that's really interesting. It's called Jevons paradox, and it's been observed kind of time and time again as a new technology makes a certain task more efficient depending on the task. So for example, when we switched from horses to cars, people tended to travel more because you could go further. Instead of going 30 miles away on the weekend, you can go 300 miles away on the weekend. So you would travel more. And so any kind of efficiency gains were lost because people used it more. And I think that with AI, we're seeing that. We're optimizing these metrics, whether it's performance or efficiency, and what we're seeing is actually these rebound effects happening. And that's when regulation and governance has to step in to make sure that the ripple effects don't actually kind of neutralize the innovation as such.
A combination of regulation and governance. I'd love to hear your thoughts about, so think a little bit more about governance and within an organization. You started by talking about the different silos, and we've seen that in our work as well. Sometimes the lawyers may not talk to sales and marketing and R&D. Are you seeing a best practice? How does that come together? Is there a single leader that would sit on top of that? What are some of the best practices from a governance standpoint? We'll get a little bit more to the regulation.
So for example, in Hugging Face, what we do is that we have kind of champions. So for example, each of the teams has one or more people that are kind of interested in ethics, interested in kind of these societal impacts.
Yeah.
And it can be an engineer, it could be like a UI designer, it could be someone in communications, but we have these monthly just group meetings where we talk about these issues. Oh, deepfakes are a huge problem right now. What are the different things that happen, misinformation, blah, blah, blah. And then we don't necessarily have solutions, but at least we have kind of these discussions that happen. Like as a platform, we host a lot of data sets. And for example, recently there was this Lion data set where people found child abuse material, CSAM, in Lion. And so what does that mean for Hugging Face as a platform? Well, people were already kind of seeded with the notion that, we should be very reactive to these kind of stuff. And I find that's great because if you have one team that's, for example, responsible for ethics, you have a confrontation that happens because you're telling people, well, you should take this down, and without having had that conversation ahead of time, you're just conflicts, exactly. And that's not necessarily the most productive way of
it can
catalyzing
be healthy,
change.
But it can be healthy.
But you need to kind of have a seat, right? You need to have the common groundwork that, okay, we agree upon these things, now let's talk about other things. Because if you just come out of nowhere and you're take down your most popular data set, they're going to be like, no, 100,000 people use this, right?
Yeah, it is a good point. And we're also seeing that a lot of, so when you have that conflict, what forums can you create, and how do you bring teams together to find common ground, but then to be able to move at speed because of how fast it's going. I want to take one of the ideas that you had said, Sasha, about including customers, and it applies for supply chain as well. Rod, back to you. I'd love to get your thoughts on the question of, from a governance standpoint, what are some of the best practices about who is leading it within an organization? But I would love to get your thoughts on the inclusion of customers and other stakeholders in governance. That's an issue for insurance companies for sure, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a whole bunch of things happening. Great discussion. One of the unrecognized trends is that AI governance does not live in a silo. And ethics does not live in a silo. Everyone has a responsibility to do things that are ethical. So culture matters.
As members of the human race.
As members of the human race, as members of the industry that you're operating in, as members of the culture that you're responsible in. So for example, you said level 1 and 2. Level 3 and 4 really is culture dependent, right? So doing the right thing, of course, making sure that we're doing things legally, but doing the right thing going above and beyond
extend beyond
that
compliance.
really depends on the culture.
Yeah.
The insurance industry, life insurance, I've discovered, because I joined it after a career in investment management, at its heart believes in data and predictive analytics. They have the actuarial, which have a focus on doing the right things in
managing risk.
And managing risk at the same time. So the discussion, at least within MassMutual, is easier in terms of facilitating. We are a first line of defense, a peer to the business, to set the boundaries, etc. So that's one point. The second is that privacy, data, and AI governance are fusing. We have AI governance, AI laws coming under the guise of privacy or consumer protection, etc. At MassMutual, we've recognized that, and I'm part of a group called Privacy, Data, and AI Governance. Mm-hmm. We think that's the model that others should be adopting.
Insurance companies have been using AI for a long time. Maybe not since 1850 when MassMutual started.
No, since 1851. We've been using it for like a decade at least.
And can you talk a bit about the transition of, it's not as though you didn't have any governance of the AI system, call it traditional AI.
Yep.
And then with the advent of generative AI and the ubiquity across an organization, how have you led efforts to transform what governance looked like with traditional machine learning into today's AI world?
Yes, so first of all, it takes a village across the organization, first line, second line, third line, business, IT, all of that, right? The question for us when generative AI became very pronounced and everybody got on the bandwagon is what additional risks does it represent and what unique controls need to be added? Yeah. We had a pretty good program that predated the NIST AI RFF that was validated by the NIST AI risk management framework. Which kind of asks any organization to kind of do the same kind of thing. We did not see any additional risks, maybe pronounced existing risks, but we needed some additional controls to mitigate against the hallucination and facts, basically focusing on the human in the loop. So that's the bottom line. We view generative AI as one more evolution of AI technology. But I'll make a quick note as well. If you look at what is in production at any organization today, there's very little generative AI at the moment. The bulk of it is supervised learning, machine learning techniques.
Random forest.
And that's not going to go away, at least for the next 3 years. I think that's still going to be the bulk of the AI solutions that we have to deal with.
Let's think a little bit more about that and maybe come back, Jag. I'd love to get your thoughts on supply chain and just thinking of what we all went through with the pandemic. Supply chains were turned upside down in the pandemic. Companies feel like are still dealing with some of the after effects. And now on top of that, we have these new capabilities with AI. One of the things you had mentioned before was the opportunity to either access data marketplaces and to enhance your data. Love to get your thoughts on how important is the data aggregation and data discovery in your work to optimize supply chain planning with AI? Is that a material part of the equation?
Absolutely. I think I mentioned this earlier. We really believe that kind of supply chain sustainability is no longer kind of a nice to have, right? It's core business. It's really about resiliency. Just touching again on the governance and the regulations, if you have goods detained in the port of New Jersey, that's a revenue risk to your business, that's a branding and PR risk, and obviously that's a responsible sourcing and ethical risk. Absolutely, critically important. I was also just struck by an adjacent thought, thinking about kind of data around individuals. In Europe, for example, there's increasing regulation around data around products. So in France, they are mandating that every physical product that is going to be sold from 2026, I think, has a digital product passport. So think about the billions of data points that need to be acquired, automated across millions of SKUs to be able to provide visibility into kind of how products are made. So AI is front and center. You know, if we think that supply chains and sustainability in our core business, AI is front and center of responsible business and the responsible tools and technologies. But of course, it's, you know, AI plus, you know, human intervention as well, right? AI is not a one-size-fits-all
We're not ready
solution
to hand
in our
the
world.
keys over to the machines just
Right,
yet. We
exactly.
We need humans involved. The issue around data discovery applies in your work as well, right? To optimize for sustainability. And can you talk a bit about how important that is to you?
Yeah, there's actually very little work, information and transparency around sustainability in AI. It's always kind of like an uphill battle. I started out actually using AI to analyze ESG reports, so like the corporate reports that companies tend to file every quarter or so about their environmental sustainability, governance, and things like that. So I started out really mining for that, and there's so many issues in that, and even just get, for example, if you have a PDF table and you want to get information from that table and finding like the columns and the rows to know what number is what, that's
what
huge,
we do.
That's a
Unstructured
huge,
data.
huge headache. Yeah, and it's only getting more and more complex. So I feel that, and it's often, human labor, analysts going in there, and there's just so much potential, but people tend to focus on the bright, shiny, generative AI side of things and not realize that, parsing PDFs is super sexy.
Yeah,
like, honestly,
data scraping,
like that's where it's at.
Data integration, yeah.
And so when I talk about AI, I'm always like, can we talk about like the random forests of the world? Can we talk about the PDF scrapers? Because like for me, that's where like both from a sustainability perspective, but just from like a business perspective, that's where the value really is. Like, yeah, it's cool to like ask your chatbot, if you can get a new credit card because you lost it, but it's really, really cool to find the information that you're looking for faster.
Well, isn't it cool just to find stuff? How much time do we all waste just looking for things?
Right.
And some of the early use cases from a knowledge management standpoint are incredible. We had a bunch of vendors came in with legal tech solutions, AI-enabled legal tech, and some of the e-discovery solutions where you have to respond in a moment's notice and you have to look through thousands of documents
without
to find
hallucinating,
information.
without making stuff
without
up, right?
and to actually get it right, and to find your own stuff, and how
Yeah.
much time we can waste with that. Okay, we could go on for hours, but they won't let us. I want to thank you all for all that you brought to the panel, and so much more to talk about. You'll be around to answer some questions from
Definitely.
the audience? Okay, excellent, great. Thank you
Thanks,
very
everyone.
much. Thank you.